Hey everyone, Margarita here. This is episode number 21 of my severe carbon monoxide poisoning. And I'm going to pick up on some of these symptoms that you may be looking into if your child was exposed in utero or, anytime during infancy or toddler or childhood, and you're trying to figure out how long these symptoms are going to last, if you're going to even have a problem. Stuff like that. I do want to mention, if you were exposed in utero and it was just, or the baby was, and you're pregnant when this happens and it was just one large exposure, if you do a hyperbaric oxygen treatment or 2 or 3, depending on how large the exposure was, you'll know based on your own symptoms. If you're experiencing symptoms, then you need the treatment. If as soon as they stop or you don't have any more, then you're good. So if you just have one, not too bad of an exposure, you could probably just treat a few times, one time or a few times, and that is what's best at that time for that baby. Again, I'm not a medical professional. I'm just someone who had to figure out how to keep themselves alive and their child alive without help from the medical system at all, in a very extreme medical emergency, which is impossible to treat without help. So I'm not claiming to be a medical doctor, but you can either listen to me and take my advice or, enter your future at your own risk. So I'm just trying to save anyone who might be Googling if they've had an exposure during pregnancy. That is the best option for that if that is what has happened to you. So if you are experiencing symptoms, so is the baby, keep treating until you have no more symptoms. Then you should be okay. I would actually do like one additional treatment after that, because most people's poisoning is not as extreme as mine. It's not as repeated. It's not as much. There's a lot to my situation. So everybody else should not be, in most cases, I guess you could say, are probably not that significant. But I'm going to just continue on with some of these symptoms here. The baby was hyperactive and demanding all the way until we had crossed that first threshold, not long before he turned 5 years old. He was like that from birth all the way to that time. Extremely hyperactive, which what that is lack of oxygen to the brain. He's got knots of carbon monoxide loaded up. It's blocking the oxygen. That's what causes that. And I know that because I was going through it at the same time, except for I was born normal and this didn't happen to me until I was in my 30s. So I'm able to gauge where I'm at, how things were, especially with not having a medical history all of my life prior to this. So that is what that was. Now, my child was very hard to control. My older two would have to come with me to the grocery store. The younger one would be like throwing stuff off the shelves and throwing himself on the floor, throwing tantrums. He was out of control, and my brain was so swollen. I could not stand up barely. I couldn't talk. I couldn't walk. I'm just trying to get what I needed and get back home, because I couldn't be gone longer than like a couple of hours. I was so sick. I couldn't leave the toilet that long either, and I couldn't stand that long. I don't know. It was out of control. I'll get more into all that. But while this was all going on, my child with those symptoms has these symptoms at the same time this was going on for me. So it was an impossible situation, and all of us would have to go together to the grocery store, my 2 older kids and my younger one and me, and we would all go together, and the younger one would just be throwing himself around, and all these people are staring at us, and they don't understand like what the problem is, and they see me just kind of wandering around, and I leave them behind. I mean, they're older. They're way older. They're teenagers by this point. They have a better control situation over the child. They're going to be able to control him more easily than I would in that condition at that time. So that's why I was wandering off, just trying to get what we needed, get out of the store, get back home. I mean, I'm talking, one time I saw my older son, he goes flying across the floor like a football player, and he's not built like a football player, and he catches a glass jar right before it hits the ground as my younger one's whining, screaming, running down the aisleway, and he's swiping stuff off the shelves, and shit's flying everywhere, and people are just staring left and right, and I'm sure they are super embarrassed. And this happened repeatedly. This was every trip to the grocery store until we'd crossed that first threshold. So the baby was almost 5 by the time this got under any type of control. And it was due to those knots of carbon monoxide loaded up in the brain. That's what's causing the hyperactivity. That's what's causing him to be demanding, whining, crying, ongoing, carrying on, his brain swelling. At some point, I could feel the hot carbon monoxide flowing through his brain when he was younger, and I could feel it flowing through my own. So we were going through this at the same time. But that's what's causing those symptoms. So if you have a child unable to communicate, or a baby, that's going to be their reaction to the carbon monoxide. They're in extreme pain. They're suffocating, their brain is swelling. It's going to affect the brain first because the brain is the organ that takes the most oxygen. So then their brain is going to be swelling and they're in pain, and they could be screaming uncontrollably, which is going to make it worse. So that's what causes all that. You do need hyperbaric oxygen treatment. And if you can't, even if you can just get regular oxygen or an oxygen concentrator, any of those to reduce some of these symptoms, because it is so far out of control and you're experiencing that many severe symptoms, or your child is, get an oxygen concentrator. If that's, I mean, anybody can, I think, order one of those online to some degree. So, I mean, even if that's all you have, run with that, because that's what the problem is. And I know it's really hard to deal with all this. You have no quality of life, you know. You're just trying to figure out how you're going to get through each day alive. You don't even know if you're going to live. You don't know if you're going to get treatment. And your child is throwing all these fits and having all these symptoms. And if I wasn't having the symptoms with them and knew what was causing it, I would have assumed, I would have taken them to the doctor like any average person and been like, well, give me something for my kid. What's wrong with my kid? That's not what the problem is. So there is no fixing any of that. You can't, there isn't a medicine, there isn't, what it is the carbon monoxide is loaded up, and it's got to be removed through hyperbaric oxygen. So that also goes for other neurotoxins and other children who are neurotoxic for other reasons, and autism and ADHD. That goes for all of that. So that is the answer. Those centers are treating autism and ADHD as well. I know there's a lot of negative talk about that. That's because the system doesn't want people knowing you can pay to reverse your kid's autism and ADHD. You can reverse it. It doesn't matter what the neurotoxin is. My oldest is now 22. He had high functioning autism. I guess you could consider him to no longer have autism at this point, and it's more normalized now, and he's been through treatment, and it did work. He went through treatment with us at one point, and it does reverse it. It does fix the problem. It does heal the brain tissue that's causing the issues, and the neurotoxins that are in there. It does work. So I'm speaking from firsthand personal experience on both levels, from carbon monoxide, autism, ADHD, all of it, brain injuries, everything. I'm speaking from every level personally. So, you know, if you find this video, that's the cure. That's how it works. I don't care who told you what. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder, the baby was born that way. It is part of the carbon monoxide, brain injury, oxygen related to the brain. It's all part of that. However, it has gotten slightly better, but there is still a bit of an issue. I'm sure there always will be. The aggression and the rage and all that, those extreme symptoms and the extreme behavioral issues, they do start to clear. The more treatment the child is receiving, the baby is receiving, those will slowly clear. And it, like I said, it depends on the amount of the exposure and how long they were exposed, the parts per million. These are all factors involved. So everybody's situation is going to be different. Those symptoms will start to slowly clear as you're treating. Now, you do want to treat. Most of these private centers are open Monday through Friday. They are an outpatient facility. That's the only way to treat this. I know it's not an outpatient type of injury, but if that's all you've got and that's the only way to get treatment, that's how you're going to have to do it. You just have to kind of stay put and stay home during all this until you reach a certain point. You'll know when you get there. But it will reverse it all. It slowly over time, all of these symptoms will slowly reverse. You go back to back to back. You treat back to back to back. So if you can only afford 10 treatments, do them all back to back, 2 weeks in a row, 5 days a week. Don't spread them out. Do them as close together as possible. You're going to have the best result doing it that way. I'm speaking from somebody who, the experience of someone who's been through long-term hyperbaric oxygen treatments. That's how that works. So, and I've done it different ways along the way. Due to the extreme nature of the condition, I didn't have a choice. And there's times where I've had to choose whether either my son treats or I treat, and it becomes life-threatening. I got to give it to him and stay suffering and still try to figure out how to generate money to keep everything going. And that has happened to me numerous times. So I'll get more into that separately. But I can't stress enough how badly the hyperbaric oxygen treatments are needed during, if you know that this is the problem. So, even if the hospital is telling you that's not the problem and the doctors are telling you that, but you know that that's what it is, find a place that'll listen to you. Find a private center, find a private hyperbaric center, find somebody who will listen to you. It took me almost 30 facilities before I found somebody to listen to me and help me. So, yes, that is the answer for everything I'm talking about, the temper tantrums, all of the cerebral palsy-like symptoms, or all of the, all these extreme behavioral issues, all these, you'll know. If you have a toddler acting that way or a baby constantly screaming and crying like that, that is the answer. You'll know. Now, with, and like I said, it could go on for like years. And now some people, it could clear it fairly quickly. I'd say like within a treatment or two if you don't have that bad of a case. But it could go on for years. So there's a very wide variety of how long this could go on for. Now, like I said, I was exposed in utero. The baby had frequent urination upon birth. Like immediately the baby went through, I think a normal baby's supposed to go through about 10, 12 wet diapers a day. This one goes through about twice that many. And now I guess that would also depend on your degree of poisoning, but that's how your body rids itself of the carbon monoxide. You pee it out. You pee it out, you sweat it out, you poop it out, you sweat it out, you breathe it out, you know. So a baby will be peeing quite a bit more than a normal baby. So you're gonna need probably twice as many diapers. I'd say 50 to 100% more diapers than normal. And that, what'll happen is once the child or the baby clears enough of it, and that goes for an adult too, it doesn't just have to be a baby, it'll start to slow up. It won't be as frequent once some treatment is achieved and you remove some of it. But then when you have re-exposures, it happens again. It'll become like a slight problem. You know, I guess that's a minimum problem considering all the other issues that are dealt with during all this. So that one's not really extravagant, especially if you spend most of your time at home. That, or I guess if you can't afford the diapers, that's going to be another issue. So, I mean, this is a very costly injury, especially because the medical system is not treating it properly. So I don't know if there's anything I'll ever be able to do about that to help the rest of the world. But, you know, if I ever get in that position, that's something I'd like to try to do because I have so much knowledge on all of this. Now, more of these symptoms here. The baby had a side scoot, which is actually a sign of cerebral palsy, and he did have a lot of cerebral palsy-like symptoms. And then, because I believe this was because I got exposed later during the pregnancy, but his muscle tone was actually hypertonic instead of how cerebral palsy kids have the opposite. It was opposite of that. And I think it has to do with the time frame of when he was exposed. And that only happens in about 10% of the carbon monoxide in utero cases. So that was I mean, it's not really an issue. It's kind of a benefit actually. So I don't believe he's in any pain from it. I don't believe he ever was. I don't think he remembers, because I think I asked him once he was older, and I showed him some of these videos that I took of him when he was younger. I don't think he was in any pain, so I don't think it's painful. So it's actually a benefit, because he could probably get really buff once they get older, or gain muscle tone like fairly easily, I think. And he was lifting weights at a really young age, because I had weight sets, and he was like 9 months old lifting 6 or 8 9-pound balls, and he was throwing them. So yeah, I know that's not normal. That's not most of the cases. Usually it's cerebral palsy or cerebral palsy like symptoms. Or maybe you'll see just brain injury symptoms, stuff like that. So it can be any of these, it could be all of these, it could be a mix, it could be more than what I'm just talking about. And now, because he was born that way, he had a resistance to cuddle. He was very irritable, whiny right from birth. He was very hard to care for. Not only that, but I was suffering from the same thing, unaware there was even a problem because of the large-scale cover-up. You still just try to like do the same you would for a regular baby, but it's harder because they're like resistant to it all. So, I mean, yeah, the irritableness, the whininess, everything I've been talking about, that stuff went on for almost 5 years. All of it together. It never stopped. There was not one day of relief. And basically from the time of the overloading in 2018 all the way to the time those symptoms cleared at the end of 2020, so almost 3 years, that was the extreme part. It stayed that extreme for about 3 years for us. And he was, almost 2 to like almost 5. And then for me, I was in my 30s. So, yeah, like we just had no quality of life. We couldn't really go anywhere. I couldn't really leave my home. Couldn't really go anywhere. I could barely work. I'd have to work when he was sleeping. You know, like, and I could barely work anyway. I shouldn't have been working at any time during this. This is how I held everything together. But all of these symptoms are very serious, especially if the care provider, the mother, the father, the whole family's sick sometimes, and sometimes it's the furnace, or they all have an exposure together, they're poisoned together. When it's the whole family and there's a wide variety of age ranges, everybody's symptoms are going to be aggravating the next person's symptoms, and it's very intolerable. So, you know, I don't know how that would go, but because it was just the 2 of us that were poisoned. Everybody in my house was not poisoned. Now, I do know that is going to be some people's cases, so I guess try to do the best you can to separate yourselves from each other. I know the noise problem is an issue. Everyone's screaming, crying, being loud. Those are all issues. So if you're experiencing that and you've got a baby and maybe a toddler, and then maybe you got like a 12-year-old and then, I don't know, who knows, maybe another adult, everyone's just messed up, get treatment as soon as you can. Figure out how to get the treatment. Don't back down, or don't go in there second guessing, acting like you think it might be carbon monoxide, or act like you're 100% sure. When you're trying to get treatment, you need to be like 10 toes down, like that this is carbon monoxide poisoning. You need treatment for it. Do not say anything other than that, because that's where the confusion comes in, because they're not taught to test for it properly and they're not educated on it properly. So you're not going to get treatment if you don't come in there with the idea in your head that you have to specifically tell them that that's what happened. Otherwise, you're not going to get help and you're going to go home suffering, and it's going to stay that way. So that is one mistake I made in the beginning, not understanding how the system really worked and how broken it really was. I figured that out the hard way, and that's how I ended up at the private center. Not only that, I mean, there's numerous reasons why. There's quite a few cover-ups, so that's part of why. But you do have to go in there, 100% knowing that that's what that is, and you speak that way on it when you're telling them, because they're not going to find it in your system most likely. Now, I know a lot of autistic kids have toe walking and such. That was an issue for a while, but that has to do with the carbon monoxide loaded up in that part of the brain that controls like the walking movements, the feet. That same thing. It's a neurotoxin in their brain for the autistic kids that do that, and anyone suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. That is what that is. So once you reach enough treatment, it will reverse itself. Those toxins, those neurotoxins, will eventually process. You will pee them out, poop them out, sweat them out, whatever. I'm sure you could vomit as well. That's not something I normally do, but I guess if you're really that sick and overload, that could be what may happen as well. So it's not the treatment making you sicker, it's the treatment reversing it. Everything has to come out in reverse. It has to come out. That's, it's not fun going through the treatment. You are experiencing symptoms along the way. So it's like you get all poisoned, and then in reverse, you get re-poisoned backwards in reverse getting it out, and it sucks. And it's so same for everyone involved. So if this is your whole household and you're all experiencing that, it's going to be really hard with only one toilet. I don't know what to tell you. If you have the ability to move to a place, if you're sick long-term like this and you're all going through treatment, or you're all chronically sick, especially if it was the place that caused it, get into a different place immediately. You have to remove the exposure before beginning any treatment. You need to remove it from your life permanently. You're probably never going to be able to tolerate it at all, but you have to remove it in order to reverse it and start getting better from it. You can't have any exposures at all. If you're experiencing symptoms, you can't have any. So that does have to be removed first, and you are going to need a toilet nearby for the longevity of this. So I will be back with another one. I just wanted to talk about those base symptoms, and I'm going to do a whole video and just read a whole bunch of symptoms, because these symptoms that this could cause go way beyond what we've experienced. But I'm going to read a whole bunch of them. I know there's over 100 of them, and they can all happen together. They can all happen at different periods throughout your poisoning, or your child's poisoning, or whoever you're Googling on their behalf. They can happen at any point during this. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to read a whole bunch of symptoms off. All right, I'll be back with another one. Thanks. Bye.